Alright, hey everyone, this is Ash. Welcome back to The King's Speech. So as you probably noticed just by the title of this video, this is not going to be one of my usual reaction reviews or read-through videos. But before I kind of get into, the whole introductory bit about what this video is about, what I want to talk about, all that kind of quick stuff, just a quick kind of channel update for what to expect video-wise for the next few days. So today, along with this video, which I'm going to be tentatively titling Actionable Fandom, will be one of the Dawn videos will be coming out sometime today as well. So I'm hoping to get to Volume 2. Volume 2 will definitely be out today. Maybe Volume 3 as well, depending on timing and everything else and how that works out. With Volume 4 coming potentially tomorrow or Friday. And then apart from that, tomorrow I'll probably try to get back to Vinland Saga, because I know that's the one I've been away from the longest, and I kind of need to get back to doing videos for that one. And so expect Vinland Saga and maybe Alita tomorrow, and then probably more Vinland and Alita on Friday. And like I mentioned in a couple of my other videos, I'll also do a first reaction or review to Volume 1 of Descender on Saturday. And because there's no Shonen Jump this week, because it's on break for Christmas, don't expect anything out on Sunday. I'll try to catch up on more read-throughs then. But I will be on the Haikyuu pod on Sunday, where we'll be talking about the last couple of chapters and the direction the series has gone thus far. So that should be an exciting kind of convo to get to. But back to this video. So just a couple of quick notes before I kind of dive into this. So this video has been something that's been in the making for a while, and I wanted to get it out earlier this year, but I didn't feel like I had enough coherent thoughts put together to kind of address this video the way I wanted it to. And then kind of slumping into, the depressive episode I had, kind of made it harder for me to bounce out of it and give this video the attention it needed. So thankfully in the last couple of weeks I was kind of able to put together enough coherent thoughts to write out something and get it together for this video. And I just wanted to note that, like another reason that, stuff like this takes me a long time is I don't really like speaking off the cuff about a lot of these issues, because I feel like if I'm going to do these videos, I want to make sure I have put together enough thoughts, dug for evidence and put it all together to put out something that's rock solid. Because I feel like every time I talk off the cuff, it's very easy for me to get derailed and kind of take the conversation off track. And I didn't want to do it with this one, so this is something I will try to do more of in the future going forward, is trying to do videos like this, talking about different social issues and things like that. But I just want you to note that those videos will be few and far between, just because of how much time it takes me to put them together. But I do hope you enjoy, whatever I have to say regarding those whenever they do come out. But that said, so this video really kind of was kickstarted by, other conversations I've had with fans and things in the last year. But it kind of got the impetus to kind of revisit it recently, based on the conversations I've been coming around J.K. Rowling, and the whole turf comment she's been making. And I think about a month ago there was also a mistranslated interview going around on Twitter talking about how Oda was a sexist. And so bouncing off all those ideas, I kind of wanted to talk about things related to that. So this video is really a discussion, I'm hoping, about the anime manga fandom and how we kind of view sexism, misogyny, how it's perceived in the author's work and how we talk about it in the fandom. And so I want to have a conversation kind of regarding that. And before I begin, I think I have to drop a few caveats and some other disclaimers first. Being that, I'm sure by now everyone has kind of heard of, any number of people on Twitter parroting the idea that, that Japan is, this Japan is, this utopia where sexism doesn't exist and misogyny doesn't exist, or if it does, that no one really cares about it. Everyone that critiques it is just pushing Western values onto Japan. It really comes down to this whole idealized, exoticized idea a lot of anime manga fans have of this Orientalist idea of Japan being this homogenous and conservative society, with meek women that never speak back or out of turn, and the men get to do whatever they want and everything like that. And not being someone of Japanese descent, or not being someone that lives in Japan or has any experience really with the culture there outside of media and things like that, I don't really want to touch on those kinds of issues, like the issues of how they deal with sexism, stuff like that in Japan. I don't want to really speak on it because I don't really have the authority to do so with the experiences that I have. But that being said, I don't want that to be taken as me kind of admitting or saying that these issues do not exist there and that they're somehow being overblown by Western fandoms and things like that. So this is the first major caveat I want to bring up, is that yes, people in Japan do care about sexism, misogyny, and bigotry, and yes, they are fighting back against them. And if you somehow think that's not the case, you're either not following the right people or you're just not doing enough research on your own. So what I'll try to do in the comments, or not the comments, the description of this video below, is I'll link a few Twitter accounts that I personally follow on Twitter that I think are doing a good job of kind of talking about these issues in Japan and how prevalent they are and what people there are doing to fight back against them. So that's a good first step for anyone that wants more kind of an in-depth look into these issues, is to just start following these people and listening to what they are saying. Apart from that, Google really is your friend there. If you Google it, you can find probably a lot of articles and blogs and everything else talking about this as well. So please do that if you haven't already. And but yeah, I wanted to get this caveat and acknowledgement out there, even though it seems like something majorly unnecessary for me to do, but sadly that's the kind of society we live in. So I wanted to get this out there because I feel like this is something we need to acknowledge before I can talk about any of the other points in this video. So if we're all cool with that, yes, let's keep going. So the main point of this video, in so much as it has one, relates to a conversation question someone once posed me. Someone in the One Piece fandom, I should clarify, once posed to me, and that is, what are the actionable things that we as fans can do to kind of change ingrained attitudes regarding, sexism, bigotry, etc. Because it feels like every few months, we have this repeated debate around, is Oda sexist, misogynist? Is his work, problematic, etc., etc.? And then every 3 months, go through the song and dance of people calling out Oda on it and saying, yes, he is. And other people saying, oh, no, he is. And here's all the evidence for, against, all that. And then the conversation kind of peters out. And again, a few months later, kind of rinse and repeat and go through the same motions again. And there's a point I'll touch on this later regarding, the argument that fans use to defend the idea that Oda isn't sexist, but I'll cover that later once I cover some more introductory stuff first. But back to the conversation. So the feeling this person got, this is something I definitely struggle with how critical I am of Oda and One Piece, just these kinds of issues in general, is the feeling of, well, is all of this actually doing any good? Are we doing enough? Are we doing something, tangible enough that's going to actually have results? Or are we just kind of, shouting into the void and we're not going to really see any results like this? And would doing something like, say, boycotting a problematic series or writing, letters to the creators be more effective? And, would it even be possible to unite the fandom in doing something, like that? And of course, this leads to other conversations regarding whether or not we can or should imbibe problematic media, and whether you're asking authors to be held accountable for problematic views infringes on their artistic vision. So we'll kind of address all that, in this video one at a time, especially consuming problematic media stuff, because I think that's an important part of this conversation, but I want to talk about that later. But I want to focus first really on the first point of that, which is the idea of sending the author a message. And I'm not going to lie that, the logistics of doing something like that, with the amount of trying to get the amount of people and fans together to do something on a united front like that, it is something I've been tempted by before. Fans have semi-joked about the idea of signing a petition to get Oda to understand sexism, or just trying to write him letters to get him to understand why what he's doing is problematic. And it's such an appealing idea because it feels like, that's something tangible and actionable, and it seems like such an elegant solution to the problem, where it's like, the idea of, oh, hey, we can just change his mind if we can get enough people to kind of reach out to him and say, hey, Oda, this is a big issue. A lot of your fans do not like it. Here's why it's problematic. Can you please step up your game and kind of stop doing that? But the more I thought about it, and the more time I kind of gave to, thinking about, how this would potentially work, it kind of dawned on me that this really is just a band-aid solution to a larger systemic problem. And I don't want to discount it entirely, being like, oh, it's completely useless. But I feel like unless we address several core issues first, it really is something that isn't even worth considering. Just give me a second, I need some water. So before we go into those core issues, I want to give again another disclaimer that yes, I will be talking about One Piece pretty much exclusively for this video, but that does not mean that it is the only or most problematic series ever. But given its status and its cultural importance in Japan, I cannot ignore it, pretend like, that it doesn't have a bigger impact than, say, a series like Food Wars does. So, like I said, I'm going to be talking about One Piece most exclusively, but I want to be very clear that this does not mean I am ignoring other problematic media that fall prey to the same, problems that One Piece does, because it is super reductive to kind of pretend like, if we don't talk about every single series, that does this same kind of stuff, if I don't talk about, the horrible stuff that Togashi did in Yu Yu Hakusho, or if I don't talk about Food Wars, or if I don't talk about Hunter x Hunter, or if I don't talk about Seven Deadly Sins, the idea that, not doing so, I'm somehow unfairly criticizing One Piece or any other series is just incredibly super fucking stupid. I have to say, so let's not pretend like if I don't acknowledge that, oh, Seven Deadly Sins sexism is bad, Food Wars sexism is bad, etc., etc. Doesn't mean that I'm not saying that it's not bad in those series. So, like, blanket acknowledgement, if I'm saying sexism is bad in this, I think it's a pretty easy generalization to then say that yes, sexism is bad in every series that does this, even if I don't talk about it in the same way. And this is something I've had, even my good friend, the black manga critic, has been called a hypocrite for apparently not calling out sexism in Hunter x Hunter, a series which he's a big fan of. And, it's super, super dumb to kind of pretend like we don't care about these issues and we somehow have, we have, what is it? What's the word I'm looking for? I have a bone to pick with Oda, which is totally not the case, but again, something we'll get to later in the video. So, yeah, so I want to put that caveat in there because everyone kind of thinks that, I rag on One Piece so much because I hate it and I somehow want it to fail, which if you actually knew me would know that's not the case at all. And the reason I rag on the series as much as I do, and the reason I expend so much effort on it, despite having, ample other hobbies and things I could sink my time into, is because I really do love the series and I know it can be better. And I'm kind of trying to point out, the ways in which it is right now failing, and if it fixed it, it could be better. But again, like I said, that's another conversation to have another day. But caveat put in there, just so we're all on the same page here. But something, I've noticed in the fandom at large when we kind of talk about these issues is there seems like there's an inherent belief that the sexist, misogynistic, bigoted fans are the outspoken minority, and and the activists and everyone else that don't like these problematic elements of the stories are just the silent majority. When it feels like, in my opinion, it's the exact opposite is the case. Because it seems like fans think that everyone else in the fandom, perceives problematic things in the same way that they do. Or that they're able to perceive problematic things in media even if they aren't framed as such. And just looking at fandom reactions to, certain events and series in the manga or even certain characters, I can't say I really buy into that. And the perfect example of this is something that I personally have a huge pet peeve with that I've seen recently. And this was kind of brought to my attention really because at Grand Thief, one of the best people on Twitter right now is doing his One Piece read through, and he's in the climax of Dressrosa and he's about to finish off the arc. And recently, he just got past the Senior Pink and Frankie fight, which almost universally in the fandom I think is reviled for just how awkward it is and how badly done it is for what Oda did with Frankie especially. And I've seen a lot of people in the fandom, when Grant got to that particular chapter where Frankie does the forceful assault of Queen, where he kisses her and tells her that, women need to be silent when men are fighting. And you have so many fans in the fandom saying, oh, this is the worst chapter in One Piece. Like, oh, I can't believe it. You finally got to the worst chapter in One Piece. And I never understood what the criteria for declaring that the worst chapter in the series was. It's like, I'm not trying to say that, Frankie kissing Queen wasn't bad and it wasn't awkward and didn't go against his character. But in a series where you had an attempted rape and assault, you have a 22-year-old romancing a 16-year-old, you consistently have the author making jokes about how he wants to see one of his 16-year-old characters having a nip slip and answering fan questions about, whether or not she's wearing panties and everything else. I have to kind of wonder how, out of all of that, people kind of decided that, yes, Frankie kissing Queen is the worst chapter because it makes Frankie look bad. But, even my problem with that aside, like talking about the sexual assault and the attempted rape, like Thriller Bark is one of those prime examples of, one of these problematic elements of the series that a lot of fans, when they first get to, will acknowledge that, yeah, this is super fucking problematic. It was totally unnecessary to have a character that was basically an invisible rapist, no matter what arguments you want to use of, oh no, Oda was parroting the Invisible Man, or Oda was doing, I was doing I was just doing like a testament to the Invisible Man horror movies, and that was the thing about that, blah blah blah. The thing about that is, like, every time I go back to that, I know a lot of fans will talk about how, yeah, that was really bad, but man, that Usopp fart joke around the time was really, really funny. Ah, ha, ha, ha. Oh, that Usopp fart joke was great. Or how they'll really ignore all the problematic aftermath stuff with Sanji and Absalom and everything that happened with Nami. And I'll link a piece below in the comments that I read a while ago by Calgrass, who runs the Grass Skirt One Piece Ask Tumblr. So I'll link her article below where she really talked, where she like drove in depth into why that scene was so problematic in the context of the series, and how it was also problematic because of how it was framed and how Oda kind of distracted the conversation around that scene, in order to downplay and minimize the harmful behaviors and attitudes that kind of women have to deal with on a daily basis. And, in conjunction with thinking about that, even how Oda's framed Nami's Robin's attitudes towards Sanji, even after all the disgusting shit he pulls to violate their boundaries. And I see so many fans talking about how Sanji is a good boy, which is a whole nother topic we need to have regarding, infantilizing men so they can't be held accountable for their actions. Because let's be real, fam, Sanji is 20 years old. He's not a boy, and going, oh, it's just a term of endearment and it's not serious. But we cannot ignore the power that words have in trying to change perceptions around problematic characters because we love them. We don't like how the author has written them is not helpful, to say the least. But again, that's a different conversation we need to have entirely about how we identify, categorize people and affecting our perceptions about them. But all these problematic elements are things that are in the series, and I feel like some fans would acknowledge that, yes, this is problematic, yes, this is toxic, we shouldn't have it in there. But then Oda also managed to downplay how bad it is by including those stupid little jokes, and by having characters react in a way where it feels like it's less harmful and problematic than it is. Now, if you flip the scenario, like, let's do a flip scenario. Like, if you think about what would the audience's reaction be, if Nami, Robin, and really all the women that Sanji kind of lavishes attention on were visibly uncomfortable around him after events, after the events like where he peeps on them in the bathroom, using his invisible raid suit, or when he just constantly tries to get their affection and just constantly like on them, being like, oh, can I do anything for you, Nami Swan, etc., etc. Because it feels like, a lot of people, it's definitely played off in the series as being endearing and charming. I feel like a lot of fans also feel like it's endearing and charming. But if you looked at it as a real life behavior, if some man was doing the same thing to you that Sanji was doing in this series, would you feel comfortable with the amount of attention and the stuff that he puts onto you in real life as he does in the series? And I feel like that wouldn't be the case, and it would be super fucking creepy if he did. But again, why are we so, why are we treating it like it's two different kind of scenarios and situations? And we have the argument idea in support of it in the series being that, well, Nami Robin, more so Nami because she's the one that's more prone to the attention and more prone to being sexualized by Oda. It's like, know that he's a nice guy and he wouldn't do anything to actually harm them. And we do a lot of rationalizing to be like, oh, you know, well, this behavior is acceptable for this reason and that reason, but, you know, it doesn't really hold together as an argument once you kind of look at it critically. But Oda continually depicts it as a harmless behavior, as a quirk, because Sanji's supposed to be, you know, a capital G good guy. And rape culture really relies on men continuing to uphold these pervasive toxic behaviors as being harmless. And the same applies to Oda's constant SBS comments about, you know, how it's only natural for boys to want to spy on women bathing, or to prefer big boobs, or how it's only natural, you know, that, you know, when gladiators fight in a skimpy outfit, you just want to see, you know, a nip slip happening because, oh, how outrageous would that be? And, you know, by framing it in the language of saying, oh, that is natural, what Oda really wants to kind of get across the idea, well, if it's natural, then it can't possibly be harmful, right? It's just nature's way. And it takes away the onus of responsibility for men and boys to hold themselves accountable for how they act, and it really places the burden on women to either protect themselves or put up with it, because, you know, boys will be boys. And Oda, you know, tries to play it off with, oh yeah, you know, Nami will execute Sanji and Brook when they try to spy on her as a minor irritant, when it really shouldn't be framed or perceived that way, as being like, oh, you know, this is just something you have to put up with. And in my opinion, this is one of the big reasons why things like a boycott won't really work. And I'm going to bump a thread on Twitter by tonight. I wrote a while ago, you know, about Sanji peeping on women, because in it I feel like I touched on an important aspect of how we should approach actionable actions, and that's education. And in my opinion, the best thing we as fans can do to promote actual systemic and long-lasting change is to teach other fans how to critically analyze and consume problematic media, you know, and develop a sense of empathy for the minority demographics that are targeted and harmed by problematic portrayals in the media. But even with this, you know, the problem I'm thinking of in implementing this as a solution is that a lot of fandom seems uncomfortable criticizing media outside of a specific boundary. And this ties into the larger thing of, you know, the fandom seem to be always ready, willing, and able to continually talk about the aspects of a series they like, and they're really hesitant to kind of call out the problematic elements because A, is like, well, I've already pointed out that it's problematic, and B, saying, you know, sorry, brain fart for a second, because it makes them feel bad, you know, or uncomfortable, because they believe that if you like something problematic, it somehow means you're endorsing it, which really isn't the case at all. Because an important aspect of critical analysis of media is understanding that yes, it is okay to like problematic things, as long as you're ready, willing, and able to acknowledge that the said thing is indeed problematic, you understand why it's problematic, and you're not making excuses for why it's not, and you're not trying to downplay and minimize the harm that those problematic portrayals are doing. And something I feel like gets lost in this is throwing in the what I like to call the yes but. So a perfect example of this is being like, yes, Sanji, and I'm going to pick on Sanji because he is one of the single most toxic characters in all of One Piece, and it's amazing how much toxic attitudes and behaviors Oda's managed to cram into what was a once lovable character. And I specifically want to focus in on his transphobia, Because a lot of people will be like, oh yes, yeah, Sanji's transphobic, but here's X, Y, Z reason why that's actually okay. Or, yeah, Sanji doesn't respect women, but Zev told him not to, so I'll get it, so I understand why. And I'll get into this later, but the idea that the characters' beliefs and the writers are mutually exclusive is one I really kind of detest. And especially in OP, when you have prime examples of Oda parroting a lot of the beliefs that Sanji does, it's kind of hard to say that, oh, well, just because Oda writes about, Sanji being a transphobic piece of shit doesn't mean he thinks those behaviors are okay. Folks, you gotta look at how Oda's framing it. I'm pretty sure that even if he's not okay with it, he thinks making jokes about it is okay, which is problematic on its own. Quick sip of water. But yeah, to continue on, another example another example that actually came up relatively recently was when a fan pointed out, Oda draws most of the women in his manga without organs, and someone rushed into the defense to say, well, it would actually be more accurate to say that he draws them without rib cages, not organs. And I know that whoever made that comment thought that they're being, super objective and critical and, trying to kind of clarify the argument. But by doing so, they really fell into this exact same trap of where they're trying to downplay how harmful, problematic something is, either because they thought, it's not actually as problematic as it really was, or because they feel like, the clarification somehow added a depth or a nuance to the conversation that wasn't there, which again wasn't really true, because in this case, saying, all right, he doesn't draw them without rib cages, he doesn't draw them without organs, doesn't really add anything to the conversation about Oda drawing sexualized women. And, I'll admit, it's a natural feeling, and no one wants to be the person that thinks, hey, I may have ingrained bigoted attitudes that I haven't really closely examined. Because what if that means I'm a bad guy? And it's not really something that's our fault for being wired that way. From a young age, the media we consume is inundated with so many problematic stereotypes and bigoted attitudes that we internalize as we grow older, because we literally didn't know better as children, because at that point we hadn't really developed the critical thinking skills to be able to notice, well, yes, these are problematic and stereotypical attitudes that, aren't really truthful, aren't really representative of the demographic you're talking about. And I'll admit, I was someone that also fell into the same trap where, I've had a lot of problematic attitudes and beliefs when I was growing up. And it took me until, I was in my 20s when I started learning about critical media analysis, where I started to examine my own behavior and started to become aware of all the ingrained attitudes and problematic attitudes that I had. And it really does take work to kind of start unpacking that and starting to think about, well, why do I have this perception? Why do I have these attitudes? Where did it come from? And how can I start to unlearn them and replace it with, more inclusive behavior and attitudes, and replace all this harmful shit that I've learned when I was growing up. And I think the one thing that really struck with me was I read an article a while ago by Wear Your Voice magazine, which I highly, highly recommend everyone give a follow and support to if you can, because they've prominently featured the voices of Black, Indigenous, people of color, Black women especially. and they tackle a lot of important topics regarding intersectionality, prejudice, discrimination, racism, sexism, all that kind of stuff. They do a phenomenal job. So if you haven't already, please do give them a follow and a read, because they really do a lot of good work and they really could use the support. And so they put out an article a while ago, where they're talking about how to be an ally against white supremacy. And the key line that stood out to me was, you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I get that, constantly talking about problematic aspects of a series can be draining. And I get that we really shouldn't have to constantly reiterate why a thing is problematic. Especially when it feels like, we can't really do anything about it apart from point to and say, yes, this is bad. This is the way in which it's bad. This is how it's doing harmful things. But in my opinion, we need to normalize the criticism of media, even when it might not feel like we're doing much, because change is a very slow process, and changing minds isn't going to happen overnight. People have really short memory and attention spans, and it's easy to gloss over and forget about a lot of these important topics if we aren't being continually challenged on them every day, especially when so much of the media is saturated with it, and we need to be the voices that drown it out. And I think part B to that is, think of what it feels like to be a marginalized person whose very identity and survival depends on it, and they don't really have the option to kind of say, you know what, I don't feel like fighting back today. I don't feel like, correcting that bigot when he misgenders me. I don't feel like, arguing with that person that doesn't understand why fat phobia is bad. And a common kind of thread and theme I've seen, following a lot of these people on Twitter, is that so many of them talk about their struggles, especially with mental health, with regards to, all the activism they do. But they continue to persevere because they have to, and because they really don't have a choice. Because there's Casey Explosion, I think, is their Twitter handle on Twitter. And they put out a really good thread recently talking about how, a lot of transgender people do not want to be activists and do not want to have to be constantly fighting every day for the right to be recognized and the right to be heard and the right to be, empathized with every day on this platform. A lot of them just want to do normal stuff, like talk about their favorite video games or talk about the things they love. But they have no choice but to be activists because their survival depends on it. And they don't really have the privilege of the choice of just saying one day to give up and say, hey, I don't feel like fighting for this today, because looking at the statistics, they are the most likely to be murdered, brutalized, harmed, stereotyped, everything else. And it's just, when you look at those statistics, like, how can you not want to try to help them as much as you can? And, I think that's all I'm saying or asking, is that we as, I don't want to say we as, but if you are someone that is in that privileged position, as someone like I am, because I'm a cis heteronormative man, and I have, privilege, more privilege than probably, 70 to 80% of most of the world does. And if I can just use at least some of that to help ease their burden, to give them a chance to recuperate and rest, I kind of feel like that's worth it, just to do that little bit or do as much as I can. And it feels like, we need to drown out the majority of the voices that keep saying, well, I don't think sexualizing women is a bad thing, and an artist should be able to draw them how he wants. Or the voices trying to normalize the idea that, men and boys are inherently driven by their sexual urges, and it's natural for them to want to violate women's privacy to satisfy them. Or trap isn't a slur, and transgender men and women aren't assigned female at birth or aren't assigned male at birth and just pretending that they're monsters. And this really does tie into a lot of the criticisms and kind of theorizing I do about One Piece and the directions the story could go. Because I want to imagine what the story would be like if we removed some of Oda's worst tendencies. Because it's like, yes, ultimately he is in creative control of the story, but that doesn't mean we should unquestionably accept everything that he throws at us. And it doesn't mean we should overlook or ignore the problematic aspects we don't like. Because I know a lot of fans throw the whole, I don't know why Oda has Sanji, be so transphobic when he's given us such great characters like Eva and Bon. And it bugs me because we know exactly why he does it. The way they frame the story is like it's clear that he thinks that these are acceptable views to hold, and that they're not actually harmful, to the people that are affected by them. Or he seems to think that, hey, I really respected and admired this drag queen I saw once, and because of that, because I'm their friend, I have the right to kind of make all these jokes and stuff about them because I'm their friend. And that's really not the case. And with characters like Eva and Bon, who are better fleshed out characters than, say, the 99% of the very stereotypical LGBTQ crowd that Oda has drawn on Peachy Kingdom. They are not completely unproblematic characters, and we really need to acknowledge that. And I know it's tempting to, headcanon certain character traits and ignore the problematic ones that Oda's given our faves, but we're not doing anyone a favor by also pretending these traits don't exist. And I've seen too many fans do this with Sanji, where they'll say, oh, Sanji's, just gender fluid and he's confused, and once he comes to that realization he'll be okay. Or, Sanji's actually gay and this is just his internalized bigotry talking, and once he comes to realize he's gay he'll be okay. These are all problematic views that we should not be using as defenses of, the way Oda's writing certain characters. And then this one of the arguments or defenses that fans use that really, really bugs me, and it's the idea that if Oda was, give me a second, turn the lights on, I think it's gotten a little dark in the room. I know one of the main ideas of defense of Oda's bigotry and sexism is the idea that if Oda was actually forced to remove all the problematic elements of the series, it somehow amounts to us censoring, his artistic vision, and would somehow devalue OP's greatness and uniqueness as a story, and we somehow be infringing on Oda's, creative license. And I am unequivocally calling bullshit on all of that. When you ask someone what their favorite part of One Piece is, no one is ever going to come out and say, man, I stand those celestial dragons because they're right and fishmen are disgusting. No one's going to come out and say, hey, man, Charlos has, 13 wives who he assaults and rapes, and then once he's bored with them, he brings them back. I wish I could do stuff like that. No one in the entire history of the series is going around saying that. No one's going to go around saying, torture, I think that's actually really cool and really, that's something that has a lot of value. What a lot of people, I think, are actually saying when they're trying to defend, the bigotry and sexism, is what they want to really do is defend their right to be bigoted and sexist and protected from the consequences of holding those views. Sorry, just take a quick break there. But yeah, I know I've talked a lot about I've talked a lot in this video. It's already coming up, I think, on close to 3/4 of an hour. Before I wrap things up, I kind of want to point out one last thing about this video to kind of close it out. And that's the idea of, Oda won't change. And I get why, because we've seen evidence of this kind of recently where it looks like Oda's stuck in a sexist and misogynistic echo chamber where all the Shonen Jump editors are, I think in the history of the entire company, have been all male. And they've made comments, about how they like a female editor because they like to be scolded by a woman. And you had one of Oda's recent editors, in an interview talking about Carrot and how cute she was and wondering what kind of children they would have. And I'd like to point out that she's 15 years old. And another editor literally had to tell him to stop talking to this interview because he kept stuffing his foot into his mouth. So when you have these kinds of men that are the ones that are around Oda reinforcing, his toxic ideas, of course, of, yes, we want to see women dressing sexy, with those small skirts, wiring with big boobs and lots of cleavage, then of course he's not going to have a reason to change because he doesn't think he's doing anything wrong. And I know that, the fans in Japan that are critical of the same thing and that have mailed him letters regarding it, and I'm not sure how widespread that is, and I don't want to disparage their efforts. But seeing how little effect it has, I guess the question I have is, can we ever expect Oda to change? This is kind of why I originally began entertaining the ideas about, collaborative fan effort from fans around the world, kind of sending messages to Oda, telling him, hey, your series is really harmful in these aspects. Could you just cut it out? And maybe the sheer volume of messages would finally be enough to kind of, penetrate his stubbornness and finally get through to him. But like I talked about at the beginning of this video, Oda really isn't the problem, he's a symptom of it. Getting him to change his mind would be great, but ultimately that isn't the long-term solution I think we're kind of looking for here. Because if you look at, say, the next generation of Shonen Jump writers like Horikoshi starting to get dry mouth. Give me a second. Excuse me. Like Horikoshi, who grew up reading One Piece, and idolizing Oda, and you see them trying to emulate their Oda style, and you see how they're also being shamelessly problematic. Like you have Horikoshi, who introduced Mineta, who he basically admitted in an interview is his libido given life. Oh, I should probably point a correction to that. Oh, I'm sorry, because someone corrected me on this to say, oh, he's the embodiment of libido or such, and he's not Horikoshi's own personal libido, because, that makes it a lot better. But that aside, the fandoms reacted to him with the appropriate level of disgust, but he's still there as a character, he still exists, and he has far more fans than he should, given the kind of stuff he engages in. And while Horikoshi, punishes him for being a shitty little scumbag, it's the Sanji effect all over. And again, this is something I wrote about in my editorial, where the girls might be disgusted by Mineta's behavior, but they never actually stop interacting with him or ostracizing him. And more importantly, neither do any of the guys. You'll have characters like Hiroshima or Ito who'll be like, oh, hey, Mineta, stop doing this, blah, 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 whenever he tries to be a little pervy scumbag. But they'll never stop being friends with him or sit him down and have a conversation with him and say, hey, Mineta, the shit you're doing is disgusting. Here's why it's disgusting. You need to stop doing that. And Horikoshi hasn't written him out of the series or have him, learn from his behavior. But by constantly punishing him, in the scenarios where he does try to peep, Horikoshi can give the illusion, that he's actually addressing the issue of Mineta being a pervy scumbag creep while not doing anything about it, because he doesn't really see how it's problematic. It kind of ties back into the whole Oda thing where it's like, all right, yes, he's doing something like this, but it's only natural for boys to want to do this. So it's like, oh yeah, we can eventually try punishing them, beating them up, but they'll just keep trying harder and harder until they eventually succeed, because they don't understand why it's wrong and why they need to stop. So I guess the ultimate point of this video, after everything I've talked about, is that if we want things to legitimately change in the anime manga industry, we need to not only support the series that aren't doing problematic things, like Haikyuu, like Promised Neverland. I want to add attiudes to this list because I've heard good things about it, but I can't personally speak to if there's any problematic elements in it or not. But we also need to get people to understand why problematic things are problematic. Because if we do that, we get people to actually, get it and understand that, hey, yeah, this is not acceptable behavior, then we don't really need to organize some big letter writing campaign or, do all this kind of things. Because things will just start to change naturally, because people will just start naturally pushing back against things like the lovable pervert trope, and they'll start actively boycotting series like that in favor of better ones. And this kind of ties into another recent thing I saw on Twitter, someone commenting, where this was someone that was a fan of One Piece before, and she noted that she eventually had to drop the series because the sexism became too much for her. And she questioned, why isn't this a deal breaker for everyone else? And I feel like that's a question we should start at least considering. And again, this ties back to my comments about, just because you like a series that has sexism in it doesn't mean you support or are accepting of that sexism. We have to I think we do have to start considering, why don't we consider these series deal breakers when they do things like that? And, really what can we do to kind of help change that? And I'm hoping this video kind of has given you some ideas for that. Because I think one of the things I have to touch on is activism is an ongoing process. It's not a one and done case of like, I've acknowledged a problematic thing and we're going to move on, because acknowledging again isn't really going to do anything. We have to be constantly reminding people of it and push for better accountability. We have to have conversations about why certain tropes are problematic, and why we shouldn't continue to perpetuate them in our work. Can they be done better? Is there media that does good jobs of, subverting it? We need to start thinking about, like, in situations like this, about, rather than just reiterating it, how can we do a better job of it? I think the thing we have to take away from this is also that complacency is how we got here in the first place. And unless we actively push for and demand better, then nothing is really ever going to change. We'll just keep internalizing these problematic ideas until they become so ingrained they will seem like the norm. And then that's how we'll get back in this flow of, every few months someone saying it's problematic, and then cycle of conversations keep going. And we need to find a way to kind of break out of that. Before I forget, I did mention one last issue I want to briefly touch on here before I round out this video. A lot of fans, like far too many fans, will argue that Oda isn't sexist because, hey, women exist in his world and they aren't just sexy lampshades. They get to do stuff occasionally, and all that FBS stuff, that's just jokes, man. Don't take it so seriously. And to me, this reads as people believing that if someone is sexist, then their sexism will be really overt and really obvious. And that isn't even always the case, because sexism isn't always overt and obvious, which is how come it goes unnoticed for so long. And I think the thing is, like, people seem to think that whenever someone says Oda's sexist, we're saying, you know, Oda hasn't written compelling women before. That's not really the case. Like, has he written compelling women before? Yes. Does that mean he can't be sexist? No. There's tons of evidence for it in the series. You know, apart from the aforementioned sexualizing them. If you look at how he treats characters like Kokoro, Chiffon, Lola, Brûlé, Shinobu, and you know how all the jokes surrounding them are about how unfuckable they are and how unattractive they are, and how when they're younger they're super hot, and now that they've gotten older and unattractive, you know, they're now delusional about how attractive and desirable they are now. Or, you know, the jokes about how Rebecca doesn't underpants and how Oda wishes she has a nip slip, but you know, and I'm sure she's the fact that Oda consistently has 16-year-old characters, you know, as the princesses and the focus of the main arcs they consistently sexualizes. I'm sure that doesn't have anything to do with anything. I mean, I could go on and on with numerous examples and break down exactly why and how these characters are problematic, but there's enough content there for a whole different video in and of itself. And I may eventually tackle that in some regard, because Big Mom's a prime example of, you know, fans arguing that Oda writes women well. Have so many thoughts regarding her character that I kind of want to get to, but again, that's a topic I'll probably try to tackle another day. But yeah, I'll just end by noting that it's also telling that each and every major military and political force in One Piece has only one notable woman in its rank, whether it's Boa and the Warlords, you know, Bonnie and the Supernovas, Big Mom and the Emperor, Smoothie and the Big Four, for the Sweet Four, or Suru in the upper ranks of the Marines. But yeah, that might be something I touch on eventually in another video. But that said, now I'm finally wrapping up this video. Hope you all enjoyed. Maybe you got some food for thought out of it. As always, if there's anything you disagree with or have different views, stances on, please feel free to either hit me up in Twitter, in the DMs, or, you know, just at me, or leave a comment below, and I'll be more than happy to have a conversation or discussion with you about it. And if you'd like me to do more videos like this, or if you have any topics you'd like to take on, then please free to also let me know as well. And I'd be happy to kind of put out a video on that, you know, after I did some research. And as always, if you like my content, please do like, comment, subscribe, because it does really help me out a lot. It does really mean a lot for me as well, because it does show, you know, kind of support and appreciation for my videos. I want to note I'm very thankful for everyone that kind of bumped me up to 80 subscribers in a couple of hours yesterday. So I'd love to get to 100 by the end of this year. I know that's probably not possible, but if you'd like to help me out with that, that would be really great. And yeah, until next time, this is Ash. I'll talk to you all later.